The wind howled across the high plains like some restless spirit, carrying with it the dust of centuries and the faintest echo of hooves long gone. Ethan Harper pulled his worn hat low against the sharp sting of sand, urging his tired horse onward. He had left behind a past he seldom spoke of, a tangle of broken promises and a town that no longer wanted him. What lay ahead was a stretch of land purchased with the last of his savings, a desolate ranch abandoned since before the war, acres of grassland lying wild and a house left to rot beneath the endless western sky. It was to be his refuge, a place where he could build something new, or so he thought. As he rode up the slope and the homestead came into view, the weight of silence pressed against him. The house stood crooked but defiant, its timbers weathered gray, the porch sagging like an old man's shoulders. Shutters banged loose in the wind and the barn leaned toward collapse. Still, something stirred in Ethan's chest, a stubborn resolve, the same kind that had driven men west to claim land against all odds. He dismounted, boots crunching on the dry earth, and placed his hand against the warped front door. This was where he would start again. Alone. The first nights were the hardest. He set about patching holes in the roof, clearing weeds from the yard and hauling water from a distant creek. Every creak of the house reminded him that he lived far from neighbors, far from law, far from anything except coyotes and the cry of owls at midnight. Yet with each sunrise he found a strange comfort in the rhythm of survival. The ranch was broken, yes, but so was he, and perhaps together they might mend. But on the fourth evening something unsettled him. He had been stacking wood when he caught sight of movement near the tree line, a fleeting figure, slender and quick, vanishing before his eyes. Ethan froze, heart pounding. Out here there should be no one. No ranchers, no travelers, not even a drifter willing to settle so far from the stage road. Gripping his rifle, he scanned the horizon, but only the prairie grass swayed in the fading light. He told himself it was a trick of exhaustion, a shadow cast by the setting sun. Yet the feeling lingered that he was not alone. The truth revealed itself the next morning. While mending the barn fence, he heard the faint crack of a branch. Turning sharply, he saw her, half hidden in the brush, eyes wide with both fear and wonder. A girl, no older than 16 or 17, barefoot, hair tangled like wild sage, her dress torn and patched from years of wear. Ethan blinked, scarcely believing what he saw. She did not run this time. Instead, she watched him as if he were some creature out of legend. "You're real," she whispered, voice trembling. His breath caught. "Course I'm real." "Who are you?" Her lips parted as though the words were foreign to her tongue. I don't know. I've never seen another person before." The weight of her confession struck him harder than any bullet. Never seen another person? Her eyes carried no trace of deceit, only raw innocence and a loneliness that mirrored his own. Ethan lowered the rifle, feeling something stir deep inside him, equal parts pity, wonder, and the terrifying sense that his life was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. The girl stepped hesitantly from the trees, each motion cautious like a wild animal learning trust. She glanced at the house, at the horse, at Ethan himself, studying him as though trying to memorize every detail. "I thought, maybe you were just a story," she said softly. "Voices I heard in the wind. I've lived in the caves near the ridge as long as I can remember. No one ever came." Ethan's chest tightened. How could such a thing be? A girl raised alone, hidden away in the wilderness? Questions burned on his tongue. Who left her there, why she was abandoned, how she had survived winters no grown man dared face alone. But in that moment, the questions seemed small against the fragile truth before him. She was real, flesh and blood, and she needed him. A storm rolled across the plains that night, lightning clawing the horizon, rain hammering the roof like angry fists. Ethan gave her his only blanket and watched her huddle by the fire, eyes wide as though even the storm itself was a stranger she had never known. He sat across the room, torn between awe and dread. She was more mystery than he could bear, yet her presence filled the silence of the ranch with something he had not felt in years. Hope. But the West was no place for innocence. Beyond the hills rode men who'd kill for land, for cattle, or for vengeance. Whispers of outlaws drifted through every town, sheriffs too few to bring peace, and the frontier itself a constant reminder that survival demanded sacrifice. Ethan knew that taking the girl in would place them both in danger, not only from the world beyond, but from the secrets of her past. Still, as dawn broke over the prairie, painting the sky in hues of fire and gold, Ethan made his choice. He would protect her, whatever she was, whoever she had been, She would not face this world alone anymore. And so began a story not just of a rancher seeking redemption, but of two souls bound by fate, one who had lost all faith in people, and one who had never known them at all. The prairie dawn came with a hush, a fragile kind of silence that seemed to hold its breath before the day broke open. Ethan Harper stirred awake on his cot, the sound of the fire's last embers crackling in the hearth. For a moment he thought he had dreamed it all. The wide-eyed girl, the confession whispered in the storm, the impossible claim that she had never seen another human being until she saw him. But then he turned his head and saw her, curled in the corner of the cabin, her hair tangled like a raven's nest, her breathing soft and steady as though the world outside did not exist. Ethan rose quietly, boots scraping against the wood floor, and stepped outside into the biting chill of morning. The land stretched endless, a sea of grass whispering under the wind. He had come west seeking solitude, a place where he could bury his regrets and carve out something new, now that solitude had been broken, and he could not decide if it was salvation or damnation. When the girl woke, she blinked at him as though trying to memorize his face all over again. There was awe in her gaze, but also hesitation, a kind of trembling wariness born not from mistrust but from unfamiliarity. She asked for his name, repeating it under her breath as though savoring the shape of the word. "Ethan," she whispered, almost reverent. Then when he asked her own, she faltered. "I don't know," she said softly. "No one ever called me anything." The words clawed at his chest. A girl with no name, no history, no past but the caves and the endless wilderness. Ethan felt the weight of her loneliness more deeply than any burden he had ever carried. "Then we'll find you one," he said, his voice rough with an emotion he didn't want to admit. "Something strong, something yours." She smiled then, faint and uncertain as if the very act of smiling was new to her. That day, Ethan set about showing her the rhythms of ranch life. He taught her how to carry buckets from the creek, how to mend a fence post, how to feed the horse without flinching at its breath. Each task seemed to astonish her, as though every gesture was a revelation. She asked endless questions, her voice full of wonder. Why the water shimmered in the sunlight, why the horse snorted when touched, why the firewood snapped in the flames. To Ethan, it was as if he were seeing the world again through unspoiled eyes. But beneath her innocence, he sensed something fragile, a shadow that lingered behind her curiosity. When the wind rose at night, she shrank from it, pressing her hands over her ears as though the sound carried voices only she could hear. When he asked how she survived alone all those years, she only shook her head, unable or unwilling to answer. There were scars on her arms, faint and old, marks that told stories she could not. Days passed, and the ranch, once a place of silence, now hummed with a strange, tender energy. Ethan found himself watching her when she was not aware, marveling at the way she studied the stars as though reading secrets, or the way her laughter, rare but startlingly pure, echoed through the broken rafters of the barn. He reminded himself that she was just a girl, someone who needed protection, guidance, shelter. Yet in quiet moments when her eyes lingered on his with a trust that cut to the bone, he felt stirrings he dared not name. The world beyond their fragile haven, however, was not blind to them. One afternoon, while riding into the nearest town to fetch supplies, Ethan overheard whispers at the mercantile, talk of outlaws moving north, a gang that had raided ranches for cattle, left homesteads in ashes, and vanished into the hills. Their leader, a man named Jace Collins, was said to be ruthless, a former soldier turned bandit driven by nothing but hunger for land and vengeance. Ethan kept his head down, but unease coiled in his gut. When he returned to the ranch, he found the girl waiting at the edge of the yard, her eyes wide with relief as though she had feared he would never come back. She confessed that the hours he had been gone felt like days, that she had wandered the house touching every object just to remind herself that the place, and he, were real. Ethan listened, heart heavy, realizing she clung to him not out of choice but out of need. That night, as the fire flickered low, she told him something that unsettled him further. "I think people have been watching me," she whispered. "Before you came. Shadows on the ridge, men's voices. I hid. I always hid." The blood in Ethan's veins went cold. If it were true, then she was not only a mystery to him but perhaps a prize to others. Out here, the frontier was cruel, and men who found a lone girl with no kin might see her as something to claim, not to protect. Ethan clenched his fists, swearing silently that he would not let such a fate touch her, not while he still drew breath. As the days grew colder, the bond between them deepened, though unspoken. She began to mimic his habits, rising when he rose, walking where he walked, echoing his words as though learning a new language. Sometimes she would hum a tune, one she claimed came to her in dreams, though she did not know its origin. The sound of it haunted Ethan, sweet and sorrowful, like a memory that belonged to someone else. Yet, even as they built a fragile rhythm together, danger edged closer. Ethan noticed boot prints near the creek one morning, too fresh to dismiss, and a coil of unease tightened in his stomach. Someone had been close, watching. The ranch no longer felt like solitude. It felt like a stage waiting for an unwelcome act. Still, when he looked at the girl, nameless, fragile, but radiant with newfound wonder, he knew he could not turn away. The West was unforgiving, and her past was wrapped in shadows. But she was here with him, and that was enough to bind him to her fate. What neither of them knew was that beyond the horizon a storm was gathering. Men rode with hunger in their eyes, lawless hearts bent on taking what was not theirs. And in the quiet of the prairie, where one man sought redemption and one girl sought the meaning of humanity, destiny was already drawing them into the path of fire. The days shortened, the air turning sharp with the promise of winter. Mornings brought a silver frost that glazed the fence posts and made the ground crunch beneath Ethan's boots. The girl, still nameless, still a mystery, watched it all with wide eyes, marveling at how the world could change overnight. She reached for the frost with trembling fingers, laughing when it melted on her skin as though she were witnessing magic. Ethan couldn't help but watch her in silence, his heart tugged by her wonder, a feeling he had not known since he himself was a boy. Yet his unease deepened. More than once he caught signs that they were not alone. Hoof prints by the creek, the faint remains of a campfire half a mile to the west, the feeling of eyes on him when he worked the fields. Ethan's soldier's instinct, buried but never gone, warned him that someone had marked the ranch. He kept his rifle closer now, even when splitting wood or mending fences, and at night he would step outside, scanning the horizon until the stars blurred from weariness. The girl noticed his vigilance. One evening, as they sat by the fire with the wind moaning against the shutters, she asked, "Why do you look out there so much?" Her voice was soft, hesitant as though afraid of the answer. "Because the world out there ain't gentle," Ethan said, staring into the flames. "There are men who take, who burn, who kill without reason. I don't want them finding us." She tilted her head, considering his words with childlike seriousness. "Then I'll hide again. I know how." The thought of her retreating back into the caves, alone, defenseless, struck Ethan like a blade. He shook his head. "No, you're not hiding anymore. Not while I'm here. You'll stay where it's warm, where there's food, where someone can protect you." She studied him a long time, her gaze steady, unblinking. Then she whispered, "No one ever said that before." It was a small thing, but it unraveled something inside him. In that moment, Ethan realized the truth. He needed her as much as she needed him. The ranch had been a tomb of silence before she appeared, and now it felt like a place of fragile life, precarious but real. Still, questions gnawed at him. Who had left her in those caves? How had she survived storms and winters, wolves and starvation? Sometimes she spoke in fragments that unsettled him, snatches of memory too broken to form sense. "A hand pulling away," she once murmured in her sleep. Another time, while staring at the stars, she whispered, "They said I was wrong, not meant to be." Ethan never pressed her, though each word branded itself in his mind. Then one evening, the danger became real. Ethan was tending the horse when he heard the distant thunder of hooves. Not one rider, but many. He stiffened, blood running cold, and reached for his rifle. Through the settling dusk, he saw them crest the ridge. Half a dozen men on horseback, moving with the casual arrogance of those who feared no law. Their leader rode at the front, tall and broad, with a scar that cut down his cheek like a slash of fire. Even from a distance, Ethan knew this was no passing company. These were men of the stories whispered in town. The Collins gang. The girl appeared at his side before he could stop her, her eyes widening at the sight. She gripped his sleeve with desperate fingers, whispering, "Those voices. I've heard them before." The riders didn't come closer that night. They lingered on the ridge, watching, their silhouettes black against the burning sky. Then, as if satisfied, they turned and vanished into the plains. But the message was clear. They knew the ranch was no longer empty. That night, the firelight carved deep shadows across Ethan's face as he sat with the girl. She was trembling, though she tried to hide it. "They were the ones," she whispered, staring at the floor. "I used to hear them when I was hiding. Sometimes they left food near the caves. Sometimes, bones." Her voice broke on the word, and Ethan's jaw clenched with fury. Whatever her past was, it was entangled with theirs. And if they had discovered she was alive, they would come back. Men like that always did. In the days that followed, Ethan prepared. He reinforced the barn door, set traps along the creek, and made sure his rifle was oiled and ready. He also taught the girl small things. How to load a pistol, how to strike flint, how to listen for danger. She absorbed it all with quiet determination, though her hands trembled the first time she held the weapon. "I don't want to kill," she said, her voice thin. "Neither do I," Ethan replied. But sometimes the West don't give you a choice. Despite the looming threat, something tender bloomed between them. One night, while the wind howled outside, she asked him why he came to the ranch alone. He hesitated, then told her the truth. A wife buried from fever, a son lost in childbirth, a heart hardened by grief. He spoke of whiskey, of drifting town to town, of fights picked and blood spilled because he couldn't stand the silence of his own soul. "This place was meant to be my penance," he said. "A place to fade out." She listened, eyes glistening with empathy, and when he fell silent, she reached across the table, placing her small hand over his. "Then maybe I was sent so you wouldn't fade," she whispered. The simplicity of her words undid him. Ethan turned his hand, lacing his fingers with hers, and for the first time in years he felt the faint stirring of something like faith. But fate, in the West, was never gentle. The very next morning, smoke rose from the horizon. The Collins gang had burned another ranch closer this time. Ethan watched the black column curl into the sky, knowing their time was running short. He looked at the girl, who stood beside him clutching the edge of his coat, and swore silently that he would fight whatever storm came. For the West was not a place where innocence survived long. But maybe, just maybe, it could be a place where two broken souls found a way to endure together. The morning after the smoke on the horizon, the air carried a tension so sharp that even the birds kept quiet. Ethan stood on the porch of the ranch house, rifle resting across his arms, scanning the distance as though sheer willpower might hold back the storm he knew was coming. The girl lingered behind him, clutching the doorframe, her bare feet shifting nervously against the worn wood. She had learned in her own way to read silence, to hear what others could not, and her whisper came like a shiver through the stillness. "They're closer," she said. "I can feel them." Ethan turned to her, struck again by the uncanny certainty in her voice. He wanted to dismiss it as fear, but too often she spoke truths that defied explanation. He had no time to unravel it now. Instead, he nodded grimly, tightening his grip on the rifle. "Then we'll be ready." He had been preparing for days, setting snares by the creek, barricading the barn, keeping a loaded pistol within reach. But no wall of wood or steel could hold back men determined to take what wasn't theirs. What troubled him most was that they had noticed the girl before, had even left food near her caves according to her memories. It wasn't just the ranch they wanted. It was her, and Ethan could not let that happen. That afternoon, while patching a fence, Ethan saw the dust rising long before he heard the horses. A column of riders cut across the plains, sun glinting off rifles, laughter carried on the wind like a death knell. There were 7 of them this time, led by the scarred man he had glimpsed before, Jace Collins. Ethan's blood ran hot at the sight of him, the man's presence radiating the kind of menace only born of cruelty. The girl appeared beside him, her face pale, but her jaw set with a courage he had not seen in her before. She whispered, "Those are the voices. I know them." The riders drew up before the ranch, dust settling around them like a curtain. Collins tipped his hat, a mocking grin slashing his scarred face. Well, looks like someone's decided to squat on land that don't belong to him." His eyes shifted sharp and hungry to the girl half hidden behind Ethan. "And looks like you found yourself company. Ain't that a surprise?" Ethan stepped forward, rifle steady, voice hard. "This land's mine. Paid for, signed, and filed in town. You've got no business here." Collins laughed, the sound low and cruel. "Paper don't mean much out here, friend. Steel and fire decide who owns what." His gaze slid back to the girl and his grin widened. "But it ain't the land I'm interested in. You got something else I want." The girl stiffened, shrinking against Ethan's back, her fingers digging into his coat. Ethan felt the tremor in her touch and knew the truth. Collins had known of her all along. Maybe even claimed her in some twisted way before she ever understood what people were. "She ain't yours," Ethan growled. "She ain't anyone's." For a moment silence stretched between them, heavy as the storm clouds building above. Then Collins leaned in his saddle, his smile never wavering. "We'll see about that." He raised a hand and his men spurred their horses, circling the yard like wolves testing the strength of prey. Ethan stood his ground, rifle raised, heart pounding so hard he felt it in his teeth. He had fought before. Wars, barroom brawls, battles with his own demons. But this was different. This was not about pride or revenge. This was about her. About keeping her safe, keeping her human in a world that wanted to tear her apart. The first shot cracked the air, splintering the porch beam beside his head. Ethan fired back without thought, dropping one rider from his horse. Chaos erupted. Bullets whined, horses screamed, dust exploded into the air. Ethan pulled the girl behind the heavy doorframe, shoving a pistol into her trembling hands. "Stay here," he barked. "If anyone comes through, you fire," she nodded, though terror glistened in her eyes and he saw her clutch the weapon as if it were both salvation and damnation. Ethan darted back into the yard, firing, shouting, moving with the desperate precision of a man who had nothing left to lose. 2 riders broke from the circle, trying to flank him, but his shots found their marks. The smell of gunpowder burned the air, mingled with the acrid scent of fear. Through the smoke, Colin's laughter carried, cruel and taunting. "You can't keep her, Harper. She was ours before she was ever yours." The words sliced through Ethan, not for what they meant, but for the way the girl screamed when she heard them. She clutched her head, stumbling back against the cabin wall as though memory itself was tearing through her skull. "No," she cried. "No, no, no." For a heartbeat, Ethan faltered. What had Collins meant? What did he know about her past? About why she had been alone all those years? A rider charged, rifle leveled, and Ethan spun just in time, his shot cutting the man down. But his mind burned with questions. He had sworn to protect her, to give her safety, but now he wondered if even she knew the truth of who she was, or if Collins carried a piece of that truth in his cruel, scarred grin. The fight dragged on until the sun dipped low, painting the plains in blood-red light. Finally, Collins called his men back, retreating into the distance with a mocking salute. "This ain't over, Harper," he called, his voice echoing. "We'll be back, and when we come, you won't be enough to stop us." Silence fell heavy after they vanished, broken only by the ragged sound of the girl's sobs. Ethan dropped to his knees beside her, pulling her into his arms despite the rifle still clutched in her shaking hands. She pressed her face against his chest, trembling. "They know me," she whispered. "They know me, Ethan. What does it mean?" He held her tighter, though the question carved at his heart. He had no answers, only the promise that he would not let them take her. "It means nothing," he said firmly. "It means you're here with me. That's all that matters." But as the stars spread cold across the sky and the prairie returned to its endless silence, Ethan could not shake the certainty that Colin's words had cracked open a secret that would change everything. And whatever truth waited in the shadows of her past, it was riding straight for them. The ranch lay in uneasy silence after the battle, its fences broken, the ground scarred by hooves and gunfire. Ethan spent the next days moving like a man trapped between exhaustion and fury. He buried the fallen riders in shallow graves far from the creek, their boots sticking out of the dirt as crows wheeled overhead. He hated the sight of them, but leaving bodies in the open would only draw wolves. Or worse, curious neighbors who might bring questions he had no wish to answer. Inside the cabin, the girl moved like a shadow. She barely spoke, though her eyes followed Ethan with a raw, aching intensity. When she slept, she woke often in fits, whispering words that made no sense. Names half-remembered, pleas for forgiveness, fragments of screams. More than once she woke with her hands pressed over her ears, shaking her head as though trying to block out voices no one else could hear. Ethan sat with her during those nights, holding her close, murmuring reassurances he himself barely believed. He wanted to ask her about Collins's taunts, that she had once belonged to them, that she was not as lost to the world as she believed. But every time he opened his mouth, the words withered. She was fragile, like a deer cornered by wolves, and he could not bring himself to pierce the thin veil of peace she clung to. Then one evening, as the sun dipped below the prairie, she broke the silence herself. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I remember something." He leaned close, his heart pounding. "There was a house," she said, eyes distant. "Big, with walls of stone. I was small. There were men like them." She shuddered, clutching her arms. "They said I was to be given away. But I ran. I ran into the hills and I never came back." Ethan felt a cold shiver crawl up his spine. The pieces fit too well. Collins and his men were slavers, raiders, Men who saw people as possessions to be traded or broken. Somehow she had slipped through their fingers, surviving where no one should have, and now they had returned to claim what they believed was theirs. "You're safe now," Ethan told her, though his voice was hoarse. "You'll never go back to them. Not while I live." Her eyes met his, shining with a desperate trust that made his chest ache. "Then don't die," she whispered. That night, as he lay awake listening to the prairie wind rattle the shutters, Ethan knew the truth. Collins would not stop. Not until the girl was taken, or until Ethan himself lay in the dirt. The attack came 3 days later. It began with smoke, thick black columns rising from the south. Another ranch burned, its screams carried faintly on the wind. By dusk, riders appeared on the ridge again. But this time there were more, a dozen, maybe more, their silhouettes jagged against the blood-red sky. Collins rode at their front, scar gleaming like a brand of cruelty, his laughter carrying before him. "Harper," his voice boomed across the plains. "You've got something belongs to me. Give her up and maybe I'll let you live to rot on this land." Ethan stepped onto the porch, rifle steady, though his knees trembled with the weight of what was coming. "She's not yours." "She's not anyone's," Collins sneered. "You think you can stand against us, one man with a broken-down house and a girl who don't even know her own name?" He spat into the dust. "You're a fool." The girl appeared behind Ethan, then clutching the doorframe, her face pale but her eyes blazing with something fierce. "I do know who I am," she called out, her voice breaking but strong. "I am not yours." The men jeered, but Collins only smiled, a slow, venomous curl of lips. "We'll see." Then the riders charged. Gunfire split the air, deafening, chaotic. Ethan fired again and again, each shot driving back a shadow in the dust. Men fell. Horses screamed, but there were too many. Bullets tore through the walls of the cabin, shattering glass, splintering wood. The girl ducked behind the table, clutching the pistol Ethan had given her, her breaths ragged sobs. Collins himself pushed through the chaos, his horse thundering across the yard, rifle raised. Ethan fired, but the shot went wide, grazing Collins's shoulder. With a roar, the outlaw dismounted, charging forward like a beast loosed from hell. The fight was brutal, hand against hand, rifle against knife. Ethan's body burned with old wounds and new, but rage gave him strength. He fought not just for himself but for her, for the fragile life they had built in defiance of the world. The girl screamed his name as Collins's knife flashed, and the sound of it gave Ethan the will to drive the man back. The yard was chaos, men shouting, horses rearing, the acrid stench of powder choking the air. Ethan felt his strength slipping, his arms heavy, his breath ragged. Then out of the corner of his eye, he saw the girl raise the pistol, her hands trembling but her eyes locked on Collins. The shot cracked like thunder. Collins staggered, eyes wide, blood blooming across his chest. He turned toward the girl, disbelief etched in his scarred face before crumpling to the dirt. Silence fell, broken only by the moans of wounded men dragging themselves into the distance. Those still alive fled, leaving their leader in the dust. The girl stood frozen, the pistol falling from her hands. Ethan caught her as she swayed, pulling her close, his own body shaking with shock and relief. "You did it," he whispered, voice thick. "You saved us." But her eyes brimmed with tears, her body trembling against his. "I killed him," she said, her voice breaking. "I killed a man." "You saved yourself," Ethan said fiercely, cupping her face. "You saved me. You saved what we are." The prairie wind swept through the yard, carrying away the smoke, the blood, the cries of retreating men. But the truth lingered heavy in the silence. Collins was dead, yet his words still burned. The girl's past was not gone, and the men who followed him would not forget what was taken from them. Ethan held her as the stars pricked the sky, knowing the fight was not over. It had only just begun. The ranch was quiet after the battle, too quiet, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Smoke still clung to the air, faint and bitter, mixing with the metallic scent of blood that stained the dirt yard. Ethan moved slowly among the wreckage, his body aching with bruises and cuts, his shirt stiff with dried sweat and powder. Collins lay where he had fallen, sprawled in the dust, eyes wide and lifeless. Ethan had seen death before, too much of it, but never had it felt so heavy, so tangled with relief and dread. Inside the cabin, the girl sat on the floor near the hearth, knees drawn to her chest, eyes staring at nothing. The pistol she had fired lay discarded at her side, its iron frame dark with smoke. She had not moved since the shot that ended Collins's life, as though frozen in the moment when she had crossed the line between innocence and survival. Ethan knelt beside her, touching her shoulder gently. She flinched, then met his gaze with a look so raw it broke him. "He's gone," Ethan said softly. "He won't hurt you anymore." Her voice cracked, fragile as glass. "I killed him. I saw his face. I saw the light leave his eyes." Ethan cupped her face in his calloused hands, forcing her to meet his steady gaze. "You saved us. Don't ever forget that. You chose life when he would have stolen it. You gave us a chance." For a long moment she trembled, then collapsed against him, burying her face in his chest. Ethan held her tight, staring into the fire as though it might burn away the ghosts that now haunted them both. The days that followed were heavy with silence. Ethan buried Collins alone, dragging the outlaw's body to a ravine and leaving him to the wolves. He knew it would not end there. Men like Collins always had kin, allies, hangers-on who would want revenge. Killing the leader was a victory, but it was also a curse, a mark that would draw more danger to their door. Yet life at the ranch refused to stop. Fences still needed mending, water still needed hauling, and the horse still needed feeding. The girl, though haunted, began to move again. She followed Ethan into the fields, worked beside him, her hands clumsy but determined. Each day she grew steadier, her eyes sharper, her movements less timid. She was learning to live, not just to hide. One evening, as they sat watching the sun bleed into the horizon, she turned to Ethan with a question that had lingered since the first day she stepped from the trees. "Will you give me a name?" Ethan's breath caught. He had thought of it often, had turned names over in his mind as he worked, but he had been afraid to speak them aloud, as though naming her would make her too real, too fragile to lose. Now, with the weight of her eyes on him, he let the word rise from his chest. "Clara," he said. "Your name is Clara." Her lips trembled, repeating it softly as though tasting each letter for the first time. "Clara," she whispered again, and then she smiled. Small, radiant, unshakably human. In that moment, Ethan felt something shift deep inside him. The ranch no longer felt like a place of penance. It felt like a beginning. But beginnings in the West were never simple. A week after Collins's death, riders came again. Not a gang, but men from the nearest town. A sheriff rode at their head, eyes wary as he studied the broken fences, the bullet holes in the walls, and the man who stood watch on the porch with a rifle across his arms. Ethan knew the look in the sheriff's eyes, suspicion mixed with pity. "Heard there was trouble," the sheriff said. "Word spread that you killed Jace Collins." Ethan didn't flinch. He brought it here. He meant to take what wasn't his. The sheriff's gaze flicked to the girl standing just inside the doorway. Her hair brushed now, her eyes steady but nervous. "That true, miss?" Her voice was quiet but firm. "He was going to take me." "Ethan saved me." The sheriff studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Collins was a devil. Maybe you did the territory a favor, but his kin won't see it that way. You best be ready." With that, the riders left, dust rising behind them. The warning lingered heavier than gunpowder. More danger would come. It was only a matter of time. That night, Ethan and Clara sat together by the fire, the silence between them heavy but not empty. She leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder, her hand finding his. "Will it always be like this?" she asked. "Fighting, running, waiting for someone to come and take it all away?" Ethan's gaze drifted to the flames, then to the window where the prairie stretched endless beneath the stars. "The West is hard," he said quietly. "It don't give nothing without a fight. But it also gives us the chance to choose, to build something worth bleeding for. If we hold on to that, then it's worth it." Her fingers tightened around his. "Then I'll hold on. To this place. To you." He turned to her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. And for the first time he allowed himself to believe that redemption was possible. Not in whiskey, not in solitude, but in the fragile, fierce bond between two souls who had found each other against all odds. The wind howled outside, carrying with it the promise of more storms, more trials, more blood to be spilled. But within the walls of the battered ranch there was warmth, there was fire, and there was hope. And in the cruel, untamed heart of the Old West, that was enough to begin again.